Hello again, second graders. Today I will be reading Chapter 7 out of Appleseed Farm by Emily Taft Douglas. And Chapter 7 is called A New Start. During the next months, the Bartletts often had to remind themselves of Johnny Appleseed's warning not to get discouraged. To make the wilderness blossom and turn the weedy prairie into an orchard took hard work, as Tom Bartlett had foreseen. Every day, Ada went to watch over her treasure. At first, she half doubted anything would really come of those magic black seeds, but the sun and the rain coaxed them to sprout, and one morning, she saw the first pale shoots poking their way out of the earth. "Look, look," she cried, "the orchard's starting." The rest of the family let their work go, and they went to see. That summer, Ada dug around the tiny plants, measured their growth, and almost flooded them with water when she and Ned carried from the spring. And here's one of the little shoots coming up. Tiny, tiny tree. With Ada's fond care, perhaps in spite of it, the seedlings grew through the long, hot summer and survived the first winter. The apple trees were not all that grew in the wilderness that next year. If Johnny Appleseed had the gumption to build a real house for just himself, Tom Bartlett declared, "I can do the same for my wife and children. I can't buy you stylish bonnets or a fine surrey," which, if you don't know what that is, kids, that's a carriage. "You'll have everything I can make with these two hands." "Don't forget mine too," bragged Ned, holding out a pair of strong, though grimy hands. Slowly, in their spare time and between the daily chores, Tom Bartlett and Ned made the cabin into a real home. They added bedrooms, they put in an oak floor, and finally replaced the old greased paper windows with glass ones. Mrs. Bartlett roused herself when they finished the first new room. "Goodness," she exclaimed, "if you men work like this for our home, we women folks should be doing something too." Ada helped her mother eagerly. They sorted old rags, brewed dyes from bark and wild berries, colored the rags, and braided them into warm rugs for the room. The best pieces they saved to make into gay patchwork quilts. Mrs. Bartlett sat up late at night, snipping and sewing. She cut down old curtains for the new windows, and one morning Ada woke to find the red polka dot curtains of her Boston bedroom sifting the Indiana sunlight through their folds. Ada modeled little jugs and jars from the clay which she found at the spring, and she brightened the rooms with bouquets of wild flowers in the spring and summer, bittersweet in the fall, and fir branches in the winter. The Bartlett farm was now flourishing. Besides grain, potatoes, and turnips, Tom Bartlett added beans, squash, and pumpkins. Ned supplied the family table with fish and wild game. He was growing into an expert hunter, much keener than his city-bred father. When game was plentiful and he brought in more than they could eat, Mrs. Bartlett salted it down to use later. The wilderness could be generous as well as harsh, the Bartletts found. It even offered treats when one learned how to smoke out beehives for wild honey and how to tap the maple trees for syrup. During winter evenings, Ned and his father whittled elder stems into sprouts. In early March, they drilled holes in the trunks of dozens of maple trees. They thrust in the spouts and hung buckets below. For many days, the clear sap dripped. The men were busy emptying the buckets and boiling the sap. One bright morning, the whole family bundled into their warmest clothes and set out for the sugaring off. Ned built up the fire under the great kettle where the sap was being boiled down into a thick syrup. Mrs. Bartlett cooked their noonday meal over the open fire. To top it off, her husband poured some of the syrup over a pan of snow. "Just think, we could have had this last year," Ada said. She smacked her lips over the sweet snow candy. "Yes," her mother agreed. "We missed most of the good things at first. We wanted the wilderness to go our way, and we didn't know how to use what it offered." "I was thinking this morning about the man who taught us to make the best of the wilderness," her husband said. "I was thinking that Johnny Appleseed promised to come back this spring and to help transplant the seedlings. They'll have to be thinned to make room for full-grown trees. Mrs. Bartlett nodded. It's nearly 2 years since his visit, and we haven't heard a word from him. Sometimes I think that visit was just a dream, Ada spoke up. What about the orchard, scoffed Ned. That's real enough, and carrying all that water wasn't a dream, I can tell you. Here's a picture of all of them out in the maple forest, gathering the sap to make the maple syrup. Well, their father went on, we mustn't expect Johnny Appleseed to come back this way just to help us with the transplanting. He probably has 100 other families on his mind. We'll have to do the job ourselves, even if we ruin the seedlings. What happens to the orchard, Mrs. Bartlett said seriously, isn't as important as what Johnny Appleseed did for us in those first few days he spent here. His visit changed our lives. Her mother's word echoed in Ada's mind as the family trudged home at twilight through the friendly wilderness, laden with the precious gift of the maple trees. And that's the end of that chapter. Next, you'll hear Chapter 8, Spring.